By now, you've probably seen this charming TikTok with text that reads, "When you get to heaven, but it's Chinese," where a slightly bewildered but not necessarily displeased man says,
"No, it's fine, I just didn't think it would be Chinese, is all."
It's become one of the most enduring memes in recent memory, and for good reason. First off, like anything good, it's not contrived. It naturally came out of nowhere and resonated. It's simple, it's random, it's funny, and it didn't lead to a talk show or crypto coin launch. Its image, likeness, and message can't really be merchandised or easily capitalized on by culture vulture platforms, yet its format and message is timeless and is basically begging to be iterated upon or used in different scenarios that might pop up day to day. When I went to retrieve the original source video, I noticed it was posted in November 2022, and while I maybe recall seeing it in 2023, I definitely did not know it's been around that long. It's a nice video, I just didn't know it was like 3 years old. Even crazier and kind of sad, I would argue, is that the original TikTok still has under 1 million views and less than 100,000 likes. Most of its attention was garnered on Twitter, where it received tens of millions of views across countless reposts. So who is this guy, and why did he make this video? First one's pretty easy to answer, actually. Looking at his username, profile picture, and like almost everything he's ever posted on TikTok with very few exceptions, it's easy to deduce that he's Catholic. Like, quite enthusiastically so, I would argue.
Sure, let's talk about it. So there's two main reasons why I am Catholic and not Protestant. This is the altar I'm working on, a little place to pray. Gotta have St. Francis. No, right here in the middle, I want to get an icon of the Blessed Virgin.
He's not a priest, I don't think he's a theologian either, just a totally random guy talking about Catholicism, sometimes with a mild comedic angle purely for the love of the game, though he hasn't posted since 2023, and he doesn't seem to have any other online accounts, at least that I can find. So why Chinese heaven? Why is a Catholic influencer posting about Chinese heaven? Well, the original video title, which is lost on all of the reposts, elucidates that as well. Why is there a filter for this LMAO, along with the effect used, Chinese heaven? So it's as simple as random Catholic guy stumbles upon a goofy effect depicting Chinese heaven and decides to make a lighthearted response to it. It happened to be really funny and spread like wildfire. While this guy hasn't made an appearance on The Jimmy Fallon Show or extended his presence in any meaningful way beyond the original video, he himself only referenced it once, the impact he and his video have had has been immeasurable. Although it was posted in 2022, it really started making the rounds in the end of 2024, and at this point has entered the cultural lexicon. It's fine, I just didn't expect it to be Chinese, and when X or Y is Chinese have become the go-to phrases when just about anything is surprisingly or even unsurprisingly Chinese. But it's been used for other things of specific cultural origins as well. Since late 2024, I've seen some form of reference to or riff upon that original video's concept at least once a day on Twitter, and it's also coincided with, or perhaps helped to bring on, a general fascination with China, all things Chinese, and even just being Chinese sometimes. Now at this point, I should mention that I am Chinese. So if you were getting ready to write something in the comments section, sorry. My Mandarin is virtually non-existent though, so feel free to dunk on me for that. Personally, I think the whole thing is fun and generally positive. When it comes to Western internet culture, Japan has always been in the conversation, Korea has been in the spotlight for the last few years, but I think China's always been a bit more elusive. They don't share all their brands and platforms with us, there's not a ton of famous mainland Chinese cultural exports like musical acts or films in the US compared to Korea and Japan. The so-called Great Firewall is very well known, and even a breakthrough hit like TikTok segregates its Chinese users on an entirely different platform. Now there's a lot of reasons for that. Politics, historical bad blood, cultural differences, but probably most importantly, the laws of China, which make it difficult for us to have a lot of overlap in our media. For example, the content restrictions on video games are notoriously super strict, and make for some pretty unique versions of games for the developers that do try to pass code. Halo Master Chief Collection is one of my favorites. The changes here are both vast and obvious. Tons of changes to the cutscenes, anything having to do with depictions of dead bodies or gore, there's no blood effects, and every enemy promptly shrinks and disappears within seconds after their death, like they got Ant-Manned. Apparently, China used to allow blood in games, it just couldn't be read, sort of like the House of the Dead games, but as of 2019, it's just no blood at all, period. Then there's the much more involved approach of taking your franchise with its existing assets and mechanics and contorting that into a new version that can be released in China and appeal to Chinese taste, which usually means adding online to the title of the game in question and making it free-to-play internet cafe friendly. Halo Online was made for Russia, which is honestly even stranger, but not as strange as this micro-trend of putting online in the title of these games. Anyway, Call of Duty Online is easily the most deranged example of this phenomenon. There's at least 5 different COD games worth of assets within this, from across all the different sub-franchises of COD that were never mixed together in the West. Seeing as this is Call of Duty Online, and not just regular old Call of Duty, it features a mode called Multiplayer, which harnesses the power of the online internet to let you play with other players. But it also has a campaign, which is wild, TBH, but easily the most nuts part of this is the Zombies mode, which in China is known as Cyborg Rising, flows right off the tongue. So what's going on here is you can't do zombies in China. In addition to gore and corpses, supernatural and superstitious depictions are also a no-go. So the classic zombies in Call of Duty Zombies are now cyborg automatons that OD'd on that RFK methylene blue. Weird enough, right? But how about 36 maps, some of which take place on multiplayer maps of years past, like Crossfire from COD 4, a game which famously did not do zombies. I mean, Cyborg Rising. Now, I've personally known mainland Chinese people who managed to get their hands on the normal, uncensored Western releases of games, whether they imported it themselves or have a US Steam account that they somehow access in China. But you can see how difficult it is to get a popular American video game into this market the proper way. American movies are very popular in China, perhaps too popular, to the point where films are catered to the Chinese market from their inception, rather than modified to be acceptable after the fact. But let's bring it back to the main point here. China is pretty insular and doesn't export a ton of culture or media to the West. Case in point, let's look at the top 6 highest-grossing Chinese films of 2025 so far. Have you heard of any of these? I haven't, but it turns out the first one, Ne Zha 2, is now straight up the highest grossing movie in Chinese history, making over 2 billion USD, which makes it the highest grossing animated film, not just in China, but globally, and I doubt the vast majority of you have ever heard of it. I also doubt that most of you have ever heard of the Beijing bikini, another quintessential part of the modern Chinese experience. China lives in its own very large world, but it feels like some of it has started to break out, especially in the last year. Black Myth Wukong, although I'm not sure why, was a total phenomenon last year, and caused some drama when it didn't win at the Game Awards, but a huge success and a AAA single-player retail game from mainland China, which is a huge tide shift from 10 or even like 5 years ago, when Chinese game would immediately conjure up an image of an exploitative gacha mobile game or unsightly knockoff slop. After the fear of a TikTok ban at the beginning of the year after the administration change, people swarmed to the Chinese Red Note app as a TikTok alternative. Fun fact, in Chinese it's Xiaohongshu, which literally means little red book, like Mao, which is a hilarious name for a social media platform. But this app is as Chinese as it gets, pure CDM. It had Westerners, really Americans, getting to interact with Chinese internet users and getting a glimpse of what life is like in China in a way that they hadn't before. People are starting to realize that there's a lot to see and talk about with regards to China, a lot they don't know about. It's the second most populous country, the second by landmass, second biggest GDP. It plays an instrumental role in our daily material life, is like the second or third most hot-button political topic at any given time, and yet, I'd wager that the average American wouldn't know a place like Guangzhou or Chengdu, despite them being some of the biggest cities on Earth. And these cities and the things going on within them, kinda nuts.
Get me off this bitch!
Chinese cars are something that people have been consistently wowed by online. They already have a dominant foothold in Europe and elsewhere, but outside of some Volvo and Polestar models which are made in China, they do not exist in America due to protectionist legislation, which, by the way, is not new. EVs, especially from traditional automakers, have been seriously struggling for the past few years in the US. Lots of offensively overpriced models that don't really offer anything over their gas or hybrid counterparts, lackluster battery performance, and really slacking on tech. And then just like really weird design decisions, as if the second a battery pack came into the fold, it made them forget the basic principles of how to make a car. At this point, it feels like every 6 months, a new gimmicky EV that appeals to, ostensibly nobody drops.
And that's why Dodge will not sell electric cars. Dodge will sell American muscle.
And the market has responded accordingly. EVs depreciate like lead bricks these days before they even get a chance to leave the lot. But Chinese EVs are an entire universe unto themselves. They're approaching the car in a very different way with totally different priorities. Compared to the West, these companies are moving way faster with new products. They're super focused on tech, responsive, useful software, battery performance, advanced driver assistance, and when it comes to pricing, it's so competitive that it's like a race to the bottom. Xiaomi, like the purveyor of phones and random consumer electronics, has made a lot of headlines with their suspiciously Porsche Taycan-shaped car. The big difference is the Taycan starts at $100,000, which has always been crazy to me, by the way, like it's priced almost on par with the 911 trim levels, but the Xiaomi starts at under $30,000. Now you might be thinking, well, it just looks like a Taycan. There's a lot more that goes into a car than that, which is true, but it's not just looks. The highest trim level of this car, the Ultra, has 1,527 horsepower, does 0 to 60 under 2 seconds, and set a sub 7-minute Nürburgring lap time last year. Now that lap time comes with a few asterisks. It wasn't a production car, but it beat its Taycan equivalent, the Turbo GT, at a price of around $70,000 compared to Porsche's $230,000. Even taking into account reliability concerns, which by the way would stop me from personally ever considering something like this, you can see why it's appealing and disruptive. We don't see this from legacy automakers in the West, or even startups like Lucid or Rivian. Those are still expensive luxury cars. Meanwhile, you can get a Chinese EV for as low as $8,000. Compare that to the cheapest car on sale today in the US, the Nissan Versa, which goes for $17,000. And you'll see a lot of mainstream news reporting about how Chinese EVs are good at tech. I personally just hate when tech is used as this all-encompassing vague concept, so what does that mean? The most important factor on an EV is the battery, the charging performance and curve. That's what really matters when you're going long distances. Until the V4 superchargers, which can allegedly hit 500 kilowatts, drop, the fastest chargers you'll see in the US are 350 kilowatt. And the vast majority of cars are not even coming close to hitting that, assuming the charge station is even working. Meanwhile, there's already Chinese EVs hitting and sustaining 400 to 500 plus kilowatt, with much more robust and price-competitive charging networks. Then there's stuff like voice commands and gesture controls. In any car I've ever been in, it's a total useless gimmick, but in these Chinese cars, it just seems to work in a way that's actually useful.
Tell me a joke.
You only get one try, the first one.
Where would you like to go to? Please tell me the desired...
Tell me a joke.
Hello.
All right,
What?
it's done.
Let's try the steering wheel control. 关闭这个。
我在关前遮阳帘，要注意哦。
And they're just pushing more unique products out. Whether you agree or not, the most unique car in recent memory here is the Cyberjoey, but it's not innovative in a way which is actually useful to anyone beyond being a lifestyle flexing vehicle. Compare that to what the Chinese do with MPVs. Now, this luxury van segment is popular pretty much everywhere except North America. Mercedes has done them, Lexus has a really cool one, but the Chinese ones are on a whole nother level. You've got hyper-luxury MPVs that look really futuristic. This is the Lee Mega, which a few American YouTubers got to play with. The suspension is allegedly like Rolls-Royce level, the software looks insanely responsive, super nice interior, and the exterior design looks like something from Cyberpunk 2077 in a positive way. Then there's a Zeekr one that caught my eye where the seats can move around and rotate into a conference orientation. I feel like these are a far more practical alternative to clunky SUVs for both taxi and family use. Even in America, these would make a lot of sense if people could get over the van thing, which, with how some of these look, maybe they could. Yeah, some stuff you'll see is gimmicky. The Zeekr van can write messages on the front bumper. BYD has a hypercar that can briefly jump for some reason. They also have an SUV which can safely wade in water for brief periods of time without the battery eventually exploding. Obviously stuff made to farm headlines, but at least this stuff actually works and exists, which is in stark contrast to the promises we've seen from a certain individual regarding a hypercar which could potentially take flight, or a truck that could cross rivers, lakes, and even seas that aren't too choppy, when in reality they can't even deliver the extended battery for the Cyber Joey. You might be wondering why I keep calling it Joey, and that's because in my world anything can be Joey, as evidenced by my sticker store, shop.digitalghetto.net. I've got that Joeyland signature bumper sticker, I've got the Nitrous bumper sticker, Free Range Mutts seems to be a fan favorite. I'm really tapping into that dog girl demographic, I guess. Some of these probably need some explanation though. This one is based off a tweet from like a year ago of a washing machine message. I got a ton of really aggressive replies from some little Einsteins about how I have a room temperature IQ and drowned my machine with too much detergent or didn't use HE detergent, both of which are false claims. But it's cool because I did what anyone would do and turned the whole thing into a sticker. I've also got a 2.0 version of the cup rubber sticker, as inspired by the Tobre keyboard and mouse videos, which you should definitely check out if you haven't. Everything on the site is personally designed and stocked by me. Outside of liking and subscribing, this is the best way to help support the channel and future video production. Links will be everywhere, I'll make it inescapable. Okay, back to my Chinese video. Of course, electric cars are just one small aspect of modern China, but it's emblematic of a larger tide change as they have transitioned from being the world's outsourcing factory to more of an innovator. Chinese cars used to be profoundly bad. They couldn't master the combustion engine. There was just too much institutional knowledge to overcome. Now Chinese companies buy out Western ones, and the Western and Japanese brands that were once so vaunted as status symbols in China now have to partner with Chinese brands to stay viable in that market. It's all a seismic shift, and it feels like it's been happening at breakneck speed for the last few years.
The popular conception is that companies come to China because of low labor cost. The truth is China stopped being the low labor cost country many years ago. The reason is because of the skill and the quantity of skill in one location and the type of skill it is.
China is incredibly interesting, not just in the here and now with EVs and incomprehensibly large and futuristic cities. It's been interesting for literally thousands of years. China has an infinite wealth, no, not that one, of interesting stories and factoids from its past. Now at this point, you've probably, hopefully, realized that this entire video is just a thinly veiled and now no longer veiled excuse for me to talk about my favorite Chinese things. If not, you have the patience of a saint, and I invite you to use the chapter select feature. So now I'm going to hit you with some of my favorite Chinese lore. Chinese history goes way back. I'm talking about Longshan culture, 3000 BC. How about some Huli culture? I don't really know how that's pronounced, but it's really old, 6500 to 5500 BC. Both were located in the geographic area known today as Shandong Province. Now this area of China is very notable. It's home to important Buddhist temples, it's the birthplace of Confucius. For a time it was controlled by the famous Sleepy Joe dynasty, and today it's home to some 100 million people with a GDP equivalent to that of Mexico. It's also got a mountain, Mount Tai, the highest point in the entire province and a UNESCO World Heritage Site that is considered sacred in Taoism, which is easily my favorite Chinese thought school. Depending on the context over its literal thousands of years of existence, it could be classified anywhere on a spectrum between philosophy defined by a few key literary works, to a full-blown folk religion replete with a pantheon of gods and ritualistic practices that I'm not going to pretend I understand. Key figures include Zhongzi, who was a minor official that had a lot of pointed commentary about government and society, as well as the 7 sages of the Bamboo Grove, who fled from Confucian rule to pursue a life of being eccentric artists and writers. They also like to drink a lot, among other things. But by far the most notable figure is Laozi, the mythical figure to which Taoism's foundational text, the Tao Te Ching, is attributed to. Now, I've always been fascinated by this book. Even when translated to English, the text is so simple yet can be interpreted in like a ton of different ways. Some of this stuff is really, really out there, while other parts are pretty grounded commentary on the relationship between government and citizen. So in one moment, you're getting super philosophical Yoda stuff, like in studying each day something is gained, in following the Tao each day something is lost. Or 30 spokes joined together in the hub, it is because of what is not there that the cart is useful. Clay is formed into a vessel, it is because of its emptiness that the vessel is useful. Cut doors and windows to make a room, it is because of its emptiness that the room is useful. Therefore, what is present is used for profit, but it is in absence that there is usefulness. But then there's also really blunt political statements in the second half, like, the reason people starve is because their rulers tax them excessively. They are difficult to govern because their rulers have their own ends in mind. Now, that disconnect is due to the fact that this book was probably not written by one guy named Laozi. It's thought that this is a collection of sayings, potentially from multiple different sources, that were honed over time until they were merged into this one work. There's a lot of claims about Laozi. I've read that he was born from a star, I've heard that he was born old, but the legend of how this book came to be is pretty consistent. He's said to have been a scholar in the Zhou dynasty and a peer/rival of none other than Confucius himself. Eventually, he becomes so disillusioned with society and government that he packs up shop and heads west. On a water buffalo, famously. Can't forget that detail, he's always depicted with the water buffalo. And before leaving China, a border guard recognizes him and begs him to write down his wisdom, and so the Tao Te Ching is written. I've heard versions of this story that involve him going so far west that he ended up in India and he's actually Buddha as well, which seems like some MCU Robert Downey Jr. Dr. Doom ass writing to me, but whatever. Then you've got someone like Xu Fu, a legit historical figure whose story kind of turns them into a myth. Now, this guy is one of Chinese history's greatest ballers, if you ask me. He was a sorcerer and explorer, classic double major in the Qin dynasty, and he discovered an infinite money glitch. If you could convince Emperor Qin, the first emperor, that you had a good lead on the secret elixir of immortality, you could get just about anything funded, which is exactly what he did. He was tasked with finding Mount Panglai, the purported home of the immortals, including this 1,000-year-old Taoist wizard that the emperor had personally met and desperately tried, and failed, to get information from. So you learned what Taoist means earlier, there is some structure to this. Now this is much more in the realm of mystical Taoism. Not only was this guy supposedly 1,000 years old, he also had the ability to become invisible at will, which made the whole situation a lot more complicated, and also exploitable, seeing as the emperor was obsessed with his mortality. Xu Fu's wizard-seeking fleet included 60 ships with soldiers and crew, along with 3,000 boys and 3,000 girls. Obviously pretty non-standard cargo. To me, it's evidence that he was finessing Emperor Qin, trying to find a place to colonize as his own. After years of fruitless searching and claims of giant sea monsters obstructing his path, Xu Fu makes one last voyage in 210 BC and never returns to China. Now it's debated, but some say he made landfall in Japan, bringing farming techniques and Chinese writing along with him. This coincides with the beginning of the Yayoi period, and some go as far as to say that he's Emperor Jimmu, again with this fanfiction-ass writing. Who knows if that's true or not, but there are statues and references to this guy in Japan. I've seen it with my own eyes. Before we can get back to the point of this video, I will hit you with one more, Shitao. Now this is much later in Chinese history, 1600s AD. He was a painter who converted to Taoism, a great traditional Chinese artist, but notable to me for one specific work called 10,000 Ugly Ink Blots. This is basically a Jackson Pollock splatter painting about 300 years before Jackson Pollock. Proto-modern art, really cool, I always love to show this to people. Not that traditional Chinese painting isn't also amazing. I love how they leave extra space because they have some shit to say, sometimes what appears to be multiple sessions of having shit to say, potentially unplanned. See, this guy realized he had more to say, but didn't leave enough space, so he had to add an addendum. And if you zoom in, you can see he was like, oop, there's a little bit more on my mind, gotta slip this last bit in. I don't really know the backstory of this tradition, to be honest. It could be poems or sayings from classic literature, but it visually appears somewhat spontaneous to me quite often, or as if it was inspired by the painting after the fact. But to finally get back to the meme, Chinese heaven, what makes it funny is how random it feels, but I'm here to tell you it's really not all that random. Heaven as a concept is so strongly ingrained in Chinese culture, it comes up everywhere. It's not necessarily like you die and we're good, you go here in a strict sense. It's much more of an all-encompassing cosmic affair. Heaven is like the utmost authority, a natural force that governs the earth that is to be interpreted and followed. You may have heard of the Mandate of Heaven, which is the right by which the emperor rules. Tian Sha, all under heaven. If your rule has issues like floods, pestilence, or your court eunuchs are just not on point, your time has come. You must have lost the Mandate of Heaven, and a new ruler will rise to make that claim. Check out this chart. It looks like a shitpost. I wake up, I have problems, I lose the Mandate of Heaven. I've seen the term used humorously for a while online in a modern context to refer to non-Chinese things like sports teams or the United States. So all in all, Chinese heaven is not that random, and in fact, statistically, Han Chinese is the largest ethnic group on Earth, a plurality. So it stands to reason that as long as there's no electoral college, heaven actually stands a pretty decent chance of being Chinese. But all this got me thinking, if heaven really were Chinese, not everyone is making it to Chinese heaven. Recent comments from certain people have made this very clear.
We borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy the things those Chinese peasants manufacture.
So if you don't make the cut for Chinese heaven, where do you go? Well, it would have to be Chinese hell. But the thing is, I don't really know anything about Chinese hell. I haven't really heard about it. And as you can tell, I have China on the mind, like pretty actively, but it's never come up, not with any of my family members, not in my studies, and obviously you can tell I grew up in America, so by no means did I get the full Chinese experience, so maybe it's just a blind spot for me. So I looked into it, and Chinese hell sucks. So the earliest versions of Chinese hell are basically a port of Buddhism. That was not an entirely surprising revelation to me. I think most people know how much Buddhism has influenced not only China, but like all of Asia, like half the planet. I mean, to the point where meat was illegal in Japan for like 1,200 years, in large part due to Buddhism. But it being Buddhist also probably explains why I haven't heard of it, why it's never come up in my life, because Buddhism is not native to China despite being majorly influential. But it does take some influences from traditional Chinese religion and traditions, like the aforementioned Taoism. There is a lot of crazy stuff on the Wikipedia page. Old interpretations of 12,800 hells under the earth, 8 dark hells, 8 cold hells, 84,000 miscellaneous hells, and a partridge in a pear tree. All of this again will sound familiar if you know anything about Buddhism, which is to say it's all a bit much. Thankfully, in the Tang Dynasty, they debuted simplified Chinese. Hell. It's still taken from Buddhism, a text that purportedly mentions 134 hell worlds, but simplified to 18 for convenience. How polite of them. This is the version I was able to find the most information about. It's the most concrete and new version as well, so I'll be considering this the canon Chinese hell, and I will be using it to answer the question. When you get to hell, but it's Chinese, what would that be like? There's a lot going on with Chinese hell, even within the simplified 18-level system. There's different variants, different orders, and it's really beyond the scope of an entertaining surface-level video like this, so I'm mostly going to talk about a lot of the characters and concepts which appear to be consistent throughout the majority of interpretations of Chinese hell. Now, the first thing that stood out to me about Chinese hell is that it seems very bureaucratic. There's a king, King Yan, he's on the thumbnail, and he also moonlights as the god of death. I'll be honest, King Yan, kind of a dick, although he wasn't always this way. He was originally the first judge you'd encounter in Chinese hell, but he was kind of a pushover, so too many people were getting out. In response, they demoted him to being the 5th judge, where he eventually became like a Cenobite from Hellraiser. It probably also helps that when he's not judging people, he's famous for forcibly shotgunning molten metal 3 times a day, which gives him his distinctly red appearance. Now, the entire 18 levels concept on the surface of it is similar to that of the Circles of Hell as made famous by the hit video game Dante's Inferno, but I think it's kind of different. The Circles of Hell get worse and worse according to the severity of sin. There are at least 3 different versions of the 18 with quite a bit of overlap, but pretty different ordering. So rather than it gets worse depending on the level, it appears to me to be more of a Harry Potter sorting house situation. And again, very, very bureaucratic. It's insanely specific about what you did that will land you there, and the issues you're gonna have once you're there. Level 10, Hell of the Cattle Pit, where those who have abused Joeys will repeatedly be hurt by Joeys in turn. That makes sense, right? Very eye for an eye. But not all of them are. Level 16, Hell of the Mountain of Fire, where thieves, robbers, and the corrupt will be repeatedly thrown into the fiery pits of an active volcano. I mean, I guess. I'm kind of partial to level 18. It really gives you an insight into how Chinese hell is not this mystical, fantastical thing, and just reads more like a really extreme version of the criminal justice system. Hell of Saws, where those who have engaged in unethical or unfair business practices or exploited loopholes in the legal system will be repeatedly sawn in half by demons with saws. Obviously there's more. How many have I done? 1, 2, 3, 15 more to be specific. But the trials and tribulations of Chinese hell do extend beyond this level system. One of the first things that happens to you upon your arrival would be the Mirror of Retribution, where you're forced to watch an NVIDIA shadow play of your entire life, and if you were good, you go to Chinese heaven. But more than likely, you were not, so you go to one of the levels. They have their own currency system, the aptly named Hell Money. Of course, King Yuan is depicted on the money, but it's basically like a commissary account. You need someone on the outside, in this case the land of the living, to burn it for you, and then you can use it in Chinese hell to bribe your way through their very complex legal system in the hopes of a better outcome. This is a pretty serious real-world practice, dating all the way back to 1600 BC, coins placed on graves and such, none of which is unique to China, of course. But in the 1940s, a high inflationary period for China, hell money was also affected, naturally, so you'll see really high denominations, like Price Master High. Now this all sounds really bad, and that's because it is. You don't want to end up in Chinese hell. But if you somehow did, you'll be happy to know that Chinese hell is not one-to-one equivalent to the Judeo-Christian concept of hell. It's closer to a Hammurabi's Code version of purgatory. In other words, it's not eternal damnation. You stand a possible chance of getting out of Chinese hell. You can't die in Chinese hell, so it's like Prometheus. Not that one. You serve out your sentence, potentially shortening it with a couple billion well-placed hell dollars, and you make it to the Wheel of Rebirth, where the nature of your reincarnation is decided. Again, Buddhism. Some people get lucky and go back as a human, other people become an insect. You meet old Meng Po, the goddess of oblivion, who serves you the tea of oblivion on the bridge of oblivion, and you forget your entire experience in Chinese hell and go on to your next reincarnation. So Chinese hell, it sucks, but by no means is it the worst hell out there, and now you know what would happen if you got to hell, but it's Chinese. I promise the next video is more tech related. I just wanted to do something kind of off the rails here. We'll see how it goes. Thanks for watching if you made it this far.